the Tigray region, which was controlled by the TPLF. These tensions would come to a head in 2019 when Ahmed would decide to dissolve the EPRDF and instead create a new party umbrella group called the PP, which is short for the Prosperity Party. And not wanting to belong to an organization with such a silly acronym, the TPLF decided not to join this group, whereas all the other major parties in the country that had come from these rebel groups had joined this movement. And so the crisis between the Tigray region being led by the TPLF and the rest of the country deepened. This really came to a head in 2020 when, due to the coronavirus, the elections in the Tigray region had to be postponed, and when they were held, the President Ahmed decided not to acknowledge the result of these elections. However, at the same time, he says that they were held without proper supervision and so couldn't be counted as legitimate. The situation worsened as the Ethiopian Prime Minister allied with the Eritreans, who they had fought a war against for many years, and they started to line up troops on the border. An important player here is the province of Amhara, which is just to the south of Tigray and which has many independent militias. And something to know about Ethiopia is that while there is the national army, which I'll touch on in just a second, all of these different ethnic groups also have their own militias and grievances against one another, something which has been bubbling up in the country and was part of the decision why President Ahmed decided to do away with the umbrella EPRDF movement to try and move away from ethnic tensions, but this in itself caused there to be large ethnic unrest between these groups. This buildup of troops along the border with the Tigray region did nothing to solve the conflict. When a general from central Ethiopia was sent to take over the responsibility of armed forces in Tigray, he was turned back by those militants loyal to the TPLF, and seemed that there would definitely be a conflict between the TPLF and the Ethiopian government, as the former seems to be portraying itself as an independent state rather than accepting the commands of the central government in Addis Ababa. And in October 2020, things went much worse than this, and going into November, the 2nd of November, it was told to journalists who were asking the command forces of the Ethiopian ENDF, which is the Ethiopian National Defense Force, they said they were preparing to launch an attack into Tigray to bring it back to heel. What happened instead, however, was that 2 days later, on the 4th of November 2020, the TPLF struck first, and they attacked several of the command positions of the ENDF along the border that they had prepared for their invasion and drove them back. And this is the first of the conflicts that would come to characterize the Tigray War. And following this event, there was all-out war in the province of Tigray, and it followed that the Ethiopian armed forces, as well as these militias in the province of Amhara, and indeed soldiers to the north across the Ethiopian border in independent Eritrea, streamed into Tigray, and the conflict started in earnest. The rest of November saw brutal fighting between these forces and the forces loyal to the TPLF in Tigray. The war is being characterized by the shelling of cities to capture them and by the indiscriminate killing a lot of the time of civilians. This seems to be happening, from what I have at least seen, more on the side of the Ethiopian army and the Eritreans and Amharans, that they are killing civilians in Tigray. This partially is because of the ethnic tension that I mentioned before, and in some part because the TPLF and Tigray in general had for so long dominated Ethiopia and committed atrocities against the other ethnic groups in the country that some see this as now their way to strike back at them. But it's really turned into a disgusting war of killing one another based on race and ethnicity in the state, while these armed forces and paramilitary groups are moving around. On the 28th of November 2020, the capital city of Tigray, Mekele, was taken by ENDF soldiers. However, the TPLF refused to be defeated and continued to wage a guerrilla campaign against them, moving into the hills and mountainous regions to strike back at them. They also reformed under the new acronym of TDF, which is the Tigrayan Defense Force, and slowly started to make gains against the enemy now that they were not in any more fighting in a conventional style. So by February 2021, it was estimated that around 40% of Tigray was not under the control of the ENDF. This figure being squeezed by both the resurgent TDF as well as by the Eritreans, who, remember, are not fighting in their own country. They have crossed over the border into this Ethiopian region and are there pursuing their own aims to enrich themselves as well as to, in some ways, get revenge against the Tigrayans. The war would turn again on the 22nd of June 2021 as an Ethiopian army cargo plane full of supplies was shot down. This buoyed rebel morale, and within just 6 days, on the 28th of June, they victoriously stormed the capital that had been taken way back in November and proclaimed that they were back in control of this capital